Maria Rodriguez never thought that one simple moment would change her whole life. She was just a regular girl from a small town in Texas, right on the border where you could see Mexico from her bedroom window. Every morning she would wake up to the sound of her father getting ready for work at 5 in the morning. Her dad worked 3 different jobs. During the day, he fixed cars at a local garage. In the evenings, he cleaned offices downtown. On weekends, he painted houses for people in the neighborhood. Maria's mom worked too, taking care of other people's children while Maria was at school. They worked so hard just to pay the bills and put food on the table. Maria's parents had come to America when she was just a baby. They left everything behind in their home country because they wanted a better life for their daughter. Her father would always tell her stories about why they came to America. He would say, "In our old country, it didn't matter how hard you worked or how honest you were. The people in power only cared about money and helping their friends. But here in America, if you work hard and do the right thing, you can make something of yourself." These stories made a big impression on young Maria. She learned early that doing the right thing was more important than doing the easy thing. When other kids at school would cheat on tests, Maria never did. When she found money that someone dropped, she always turned it in to the teacher. Her parents taught her that your word and your honor were the most important things you could have. Maria wasn't the smartest kid in her class, and her family didn't have much money for college. But she was determined to make something of herself. She watched military shows on TV and read books about heroes who served their country. The idea of being part of something bigger than herself really appealed to her. When Maria turned 18, she made a decision that surprised everyone in her small town. She walked into the Marine Corps recruiting office and signed up to serve her country. Her parents were scared but also proud. They knew their daughter had always been strong-willed and wanted to help others. Basic training was the hardest thing Maria had ever done in her life. The drill sergeants yelled at her every day. She had to wake up at 4 in the morning and run for miles. She learned how to shoot rifles and throw grenades. But the hardest part wasn't the physical training. It was learning what it really meant to be a Marine. The Marine Corps taught her about honor, courage, and commitment. They taught her that being a Marine meant putting others before yourself. It meant standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. It meant never leaving a fellow Marine behind no matter what. During one training exercise, Maria's squad got lost in the woods during a thunderstorm. Everyone was tired, cold, and wanted to give up. But Maria remembered what her father had taught her about never giving up when things get tough. She helped her squad navigate through the storm and get back to base safely. Her drill sergeant noticed her leadership that day. After basic training, Maria was sent to advanced combat training. She learned how to be a warrior, but also how to be a protector. The instructors taught them that Marines fight to protect innocent people and defend freedom. They don't fight for glory or revenge, they fight because it's their duty. Maria excelled in her training. She was a natural leader and her fellow Marines respected her. She never asked anyone to do something she wouldn't do herself. When someone in her unit was struggling, Maria would stay up late to help them study or practice their skills. She understood that a team is only as strong as its weakest member. But Maria's real test came when she was deployed to Afghanistan. This wasn't training anymore. This was real life where real bullets could hurt real people. Maria was scared, but she was also ready. She had trained for this moment for months. Her first few weeks in Afghanistan were quiet. She went on patrols and helped with security at the base. She wrote letters home to her parents telling them she was safe and that they shouldn't worry about her. She made friends with the local children who would wave at the Marines when they drove by. Then everything changed on a Tuesday morning in October. Maria's squad was on a routine patrol in a small village when they heard a loud explosion behind them. An improvised explosive device had gone off near their vehicle. 3 of her fellow Marines were hurt, and one of them was her squad leader, Sergeant Thompson. Maria's training kicked in immediately. While bullets flew around them, she ran to help her wounded friends. She dragged one Marine to safety behind a concrete wall. Then she went back for another one. The whole time, enemy fighters were shooting at them from nearby buildings. Sergeant Thompson was hurt the worst. Maria could see that he was in bad shape, but she stayed with him and tried to keep him calm. She called for medical help on her radio while applying pressure to his wounds. Thompson was a good man who had been in the Marines for 8 years. He had a wife back home and a baby daughter he had never met. As Maria held pressure on Thompson's wounds, he looked up at her with tears in his eyes. He was scared, and Maria could tell he knew he might not make it home. He pulled out a picture of his baby daughter from his pocket. The little girl had been born just 2 months before he deployed to Afghanistan. "Tell me about her," Maria said, trying to keep Thompson talking and conscious. Thompson smiled through his pain and said, "Her name is Lucy. She has her mother's eyes and she laughs every time I make funny faces in our video calls. I was supposed to teach her how to ride a bike when I get home." Thompson talked about his dreams for his daughter. He wanted to coach her soccer team and help her with her homework. He wanted to walk her down the aisle at her wedding someday. He wanted to be the kind of father that Maria's dad had been to her. Someone who worked hard and always did the right thing. Medical help finally arrived, but it was too late. Sergeant Thompson passed away in Maria's arms, still holding the picture of his baby daughter. Maria had seen difficult things before, but losing Thompson changed something inside her. She realized that being a Marine wasn't just about following orders or being tough. It was about protecting the people you serve with and the values you believe in. After Thompson's funeral, Maria threw herself into her duties with even more dedication. She studied military history and read about the Constitution she had sworn to protect. She understood that her oath wasn't just words. It was a promise to defend the principles that made America special. Maria served 2 more years in Afghanistan before returning to the United States. She had earned several medals for her bravery, including a Purple Heart after being wounded in another attack. But the medal she was most proud of was a letter from Thompson's wife, thanking her for being with her husband in his final moments. When Maria returned to the United States, she was assigned to Marine Corps Base Quantico in Virginia. This was a prestigious assignment. Quantico was where the Marine Corps trained its officers and where important military ceremonies took place. Maria's job was to serve as a protocol escort for high-ranking government officials who visited the base. This job required Marines who had perfect records and could be trusted to represent the Marine Corps with dignity and professionalism. Maria's commanding officers chose her because she had proven herself in combat and because she understood what it meant to serve with honor. At Quantico, Maria met Colonel Williams, her new commanding officer. Colonel Williams was an older Marine who had served in multiple deployments and had earned the respect of everyone on the base. He was known for being fair but demanding. He expected his Marines to always do their best and to never compromise their integrity. Colonel Williams saw something special in Maria. He knew she had been through difficult experiences in Afghanistan, but he also saw that those experiences had made her stronger and more committed to her values. He trusted her with important assignments and relied on her judgment. Maria's duties at Quantico included escorting visiting generals, congressmen, and other government officials around the base. She would meet them at the gate, brief them on base procedures, and accompany them to their meetings. It was an honor to represent the Marine Corps in this way, and Maria took her responsibilities seriously. Every morning, Maria would polish her uniform until it was perfect. She would study the backgrounds of the officials she would be escorting that day, learning about their careers and their roles in government. She wanted to be prepared to answer any questions they might have and to represent the Marine Corps with professionalism. But Maria never forgot the lessons she had learned. From her parents and from Sergeant Thompson, she understood that her ultimate loyalty was not to any individual person, but to the Constitution and the values it represented. She had sworn an oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, both foreign and domestic. Maria's life was about to change in a way she never expected. She had no idea that her commitment to her values would soon put her in a position where she would have to choose between following orders and following her conscience. The lessons her father had taught her about always doing the right thing, and the promise she had made to Sergeant Thompson's memory, would soon be put to the ultimate test. The young Marine who had grown up in a small Texas border town was about to face a moment that would define not just her career, but her entire life. Everything she had learned about honor, courage, and commitment was about to be challenged in a way she never imagined possible. Maria had been working at Quantico for 6 months when she first heard the name Kash Patel on the news. She was in the common room with other Marines, watching the evening news after a long day of training. The news anchor was talking about President Trump's new nomination for FBI director, and Maria paid attention because part of her job involved escorting high-ranking government officials. At first, Maria didn't think much about it. Politicians came and went, and her job was simply to be professional and respectful to whoever visited the base. But as the days went by, she kept hearing more about this Kash Patel person, and what she heard started to worry her. Maria had always been someone who did her homework. When she was in school, she never went to class unprepared. When she was deployed in Afghanistan, she studied the local culture and customs so she could better connect with the people there. Now, as part of her duties at Quantico, she made it a point to research every official she would be escorting. So when she learned that Kash Patel would be visiting Quantico in 2 weeks, Maria did what she always did. She sat down at her computer and started reading everything she could find about him. What she discovered made her stomach turn. Maria read about how Patel had spread false stories about the 2020 election. She read about his attacks on career FBI agents and intelligence officers who had served their country faithfully for decades. These weren't just political disagreements. These were attacks on the very institutions that Maria had sworn to protect. But what bothered Maria the most were Patel's comments about military personnel. She found interviews where he had criticized generals and other military leaders who had spoken out about certain policies. He had called them traitors and suggested they should be prosecuted. Some of these were people who had served in combat, just like Maria had. Maria thought about Sergeant Thompson and all the other brave men and women she had served with in Afghanistan. These were people who had put their lives on the line for their country. They had earned the right to speak their minds about the policies that affected the military and the nation. To see someone attacking them for exercising their constitutional rights made Maria angry. She also read about Patel's plans for the FBI. He had written a book where he talked about using the FBI to go after his political enemies. He had made lists of government employees he wanted to fire or prosecute. This wasn't about law and order. This was about using law enforcement as a weapon against political opponents. Maria remembered her father's stories about why he had left his home, country. He had told her about corrupt officials who used their power to hurt people who disagreed with them. He had come to America because he believed it was a place where the law applied equally to everyone, regardless of their political beliefs. Maria continued her research. She found more troubling information. Patel had been involved in spreading conspiracy theories about government agencies. He had attacked career civil servants who had dedicated their lives to serving the country. He had shown little respect for the rule of law or the institutions that kept American democracy functioning. The more Maria read, the more conflicted she felt. As a Marine, she was supposed to show respect to all government officials, regardless of their political party. But as someone who had sworn an oath to defend the Constitution, how could she show respect to someone who seemed to want to undermine the very system she had promised to protect? Maria tried to talk to some of her fellow Marines about her concerns, but most of them didn't want to get involved in political discussions. They reminded her that their job was to follow orders and stay out of politics. Maria understood their position, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this situation was different. She thought about calling her parents, but she knew they would worry about her if she told them about her concerns. Her father had always taught her to do the right thing, but he had also taught her to be smart about it. Getting into trouble with the military wouldn't help anyone. Maria decided to talk to Colonel Williams about her concerns. She had come to respect her commanding officer greatly over the past 6 months. He was a man of integrity who had always been straight with his Marines. If anyone could give her good advice, it would be him. She knocked on Colonel Williams's office. One afternoon after her duties were finished for the day, the colonel looked up from his paperwork and invited her to sit down. Maria had always felt comfortable talking to him, but this conversation felt different. "Sir, I wanted to talk to you about the upcoming visit from Kash Patel," Maria began, carefully. "I've been doing my usual research and I have some concerns about escorting him." Colonel Williams leaned back in his chair and studied Maria's face. He had been in the military long enough to recognize when one of his Marines was struggling with something important. "What kind of concerns, Rodriguez?" Maria took a deep breath and explained what she had learned about Patel. She talked about his attacks on military personnel and his plans to weaponize law enforcement. She explained how his statements seemed to go against everything she had sworn to defend as a Marine. Colonel Williams listened quietly, nodding occasionally. When Maria finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. "Rodriguez, I appreciate you coming to me with this. It shows that you're thinking seriously about your duties and your oath." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Marines training on the parade ground. "You know, I've been in the Marines for 25 years. I've served under presidents from both parties. I've escorted officials I agreed with and officials I disagreed with. The key is remembering who we serve." Maria waited for him to continue. Colonel Williams turned back to face her. "We don't serve individual politicians, Rodriguez. We serve the Constitution and the American people. Sometimes that means showing respect to people we don't personally like or agree with. But it also means staying true to our oath and our values." "Sir, what if those two things conflict?" Maria asked. "What if showing respect to someone means compromising our oath to defend the Constitution?" Colonel Williams sat back down and looked directly at Maria. "That's a question every service member has to answer for themselves. I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you this. At the end of the day, you have to be able to look at yourself in the mirror and know that you acted with honor." Maria left Colonel Williams's office feeling more confused than ever. She understood what he was telling her, but she still didn't know what she was going to do when Patel arrived at Quantico. Over the next week, Maria continued to follow the news coverage of Patel's nomination. She watched his confirmation hearings and listened to his responses to senators' questions. Instead of reassuring her, what she heard made her even more concerned. Patel seemed to dodge questions about his past statements. When asked about his plans for the FBI, he gave vague answers that didn't address the concerns that had been raised. When asked about his attacks on military personnel, he didn't apologize or clarify his position. Maria also noticed how some of her fellow service members were reacting to the news coverage. In private conversations, several of them expressed concerns similar to hers. They were worried about what Patel's leadership might mean for law enforcement and intelligence agencies. They were troubled by his apparent willingness to use government power against political opponents, but none of them wanted to speak up publicly. They all had careers to think about and families to support. Getting involved in political controversies could hurt their chances for promotion or even end their military careers. Maria understood their position, but she also felt frustrated by it. The week before Patel's visit, Colonel Williams called a meeting with all the Marines who would be involved in the escort duties. He went over the protocol more carefully than usual, emphasizing the importance of professionalism and military bearing. "Remember," he told them, "we represent the Marine Corps and the United States military in everything we do. Our behavior reflects not just on us, but on everyone who has worn this uniform. I expect nothing less than perfect military courtesy from all of you." But then Colonel Williams said something that stuck with Maria. He looked around the room at all the Marines and said, "At the same time, never forget that we serve something bigger than any individual person. We serve the Constitution and the values it represents. That's what makes us different from soldiers in other countries who serve only their leaders." Maria wondered if Colonel Williams was sending them a message. Was he telling them that their loyalty should be to their principles rather than to any individual official? Or was he simply reminding them of their general duties as Marines? As the day of Patel's visit approached, Maria found herself losing sleep. She would lie awake at night thinking about Sergeant Thompson and his baby daughter. She thought about her parents and the sacrifices they had made to come to America. She thought about all the Marines who had died defending the Constitution and the freedoms it guaranteed. Maria also thought about the oath she had taken when she became a Marine. She had promised to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. She had sworn to bear true faith and allegiance to the United States. These weren't just words to her, they were sacred promises. The night before Patel's visit, Maria called her parents. She didn't tell them about her specific concerns, but she asked her father to remind her of the stories he used to tell about why they came to America. Her father's voice was warm and familiar over the phone. "Mija," he said, using his pet name for her. "We came here because America is supposed to be different. In America, it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, powerful or weak. The law is supposed to apply to everyone equally. That's what makes this country special." "But what if the people in power don't respect that?" Maria asked. "What if they try to use their power to hurt people who disagree with them?" Her father was quiet for a moment. "That's when good people have to stand up, even if it's difficult. That's when you have to remember that doing the right thing is more important than doing the easy thing." After hanging up the phone, Maria knew what she had to do. She thought about Sergeant Thompson's last words about wanting to teach his daughter to always do the right thing. She thought about her father's courage in leaving everything behind to come to a country where principles mattered more than power. Maria realized that tomorrow would be a test of everything she believed in. She had spent her whole life preparing for this moment, even though she hadn't known it at the time. Everything her parents had taught her, everything she had learned in the Marines, everything Sergeant Thompson had died defending. It all came down to what she would do when Kash Patel extended his hand to her. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Maria whispered a prayer for strength and courage. Tomorrow, she would find out what kind of Marine she really was. Maria woke up at 4 in the morning, 2 hours before her alarm was supposed to go off. She had barely slept, tossing and turning all night as her mind raced with thoughts about what the day might bring. She lay in her narrow military bunk, staring at the ceiling and listening to her roommate's quiet breathing. The base was still dark and quiet at this early hour. Maria got up and went to the bathroom to splash cold water on her face. When she looked in the mirror, she could see the exhaustion in her eyes, but she also saw something else, a determination that hadn't been there before. She spent extra time that morning preparing her uniform. Every button was polished until it gleamed. Every crease was pressed to perfection. Her boots were shined so well that she could see her reflection in them. If this was going to be an important day in her life, she wanted to look like the Marine she had trained to become. As Maria got dressed, she thought about a conversation she'd had with her grandmother years ago, before the old woman had passed away. Her grandmother had lived through difficult times in Mexico, and had always told Maria that there would come moments in life when you have to choose between what's easy and what's right. "When that moment comes, Mija," her grandmother had said, "you'll know it in your heart, and you'll have to be brave enough to choose correctly even if it costs you something important." At 6 in the morning, Maria joined the other Marines for their usual morning run around the base. The cool Virginia. Air felt good in her lungs, and the familiar rhythm of running helped calm her nerves. She ran alongside Marines she had come to know well over the past months, good people who, like her, had sworn to serve their country with honor. After the run, the Marines gathered for breakfast in the mess hall. The conversation was lighter than usual, with jokes and friendly teasing. But Maria noticed that several of her fellow Marines seemed a bit more serious than normal. She wondered if they were thinking about the day ahead too. Colonel Williams appeared in the mess hall during breakfast, which wasn't unusual, but Maria noticed he spent more time than normal walking around and talking to the Marines. When he stopped by her table, he gave her a brief nod and a look that seemed to say, "Remember what we talked about." At 8 in the morning, the escort team gathered for their final briefing. Colonel Williams went over the schedule one more time. Kash Patel would arrive at 10:30. He would be met at the main gate by the honor guard, and then escorted to the headquarters building for meetings with base leadership. At noon, there would be a formal reception in the officers' club, where Patel would meet with various base personnel. "I want everything to go smoothly today," Colonel Williams told them. "This is a high-profile visit, and there will probably be media attention. Remember that you represent not just yourselves, but the entire Marine Corps." Maria listened carefully to every word, but her mind kept drifting to what would happen during that formal reception. She knew that protocol required her to be in the receiving line, where she would shake hands with Patel and exchange brief pleasantries. It was a simple, routine part of her duties that she had performed dozens of times with other officials. But this time felt different. This time she wasn't sure she could bring herself to shake the hand of someone whose actions and words went against everything she believed in. At 9:30, Maria took her position with the other Marines who would be part of the escort team. They stood in formation near the main gate, waiting for Patel's motorcade to arrive. The morning sun was getting stronger, and Maria could feel sweat beginning to form under her dress blue uniform. She looked down the line at her fellow Marines. These were good people who had dedicated their lives to serving their country. Some of them had served in combat, just like she had. Others had chosen different paths of service, but all of them had made sacrifices for something bigger than themselves. Maria thought about what her father would say if he could see her now. He had always been so proud of her for becoming a Marine. When she came home on leave, he would introduce her to everyone in their neighborhood as "my daughter, the Marine." The pride in his voice always made her feel like she was doing something worthwhile with her life. But her father had also taught her that being proud of your service meant never forgetting why you serve. You don't serve for the praise or the recognition. You serve because you believe in something important: freedom, justice, and the idea that all people deserve to be treated fairly under the law. At exactly 10:30, the motorcade appeared at the main gate. 3 black SUVs with tinted windows, followed by a police escort. Maria could feel her heart rate increase as the vehicles approached. This was really happening. In just a few hours, she would be face to face with Kash Patel. The first part of the visit went according to plan. Patel stepped out of the lead vehicle and the honor guard performed their ceremonial duties perfectly. He was a shorter man than Maria had expected, wearing a dark suit and tie. He smiled and waved at the small group of media representatives who had been allowed onto the base to cover the visit. Maria and the other escort Marines fell in behind Patel and his security detail as they walked toward the headquarters building. She studied him as they walked, trying to reconcile the person she was seeing with the troubling things she had read about him. During the morning meetings, Maria and the other Marines waited outside the conference rooms while Patel met with base leadership. She could hear the muffled sounds of conversation through the doors, but she couldn't make out what was being said. Part of her was curious about what kind of impression Patel was making on the Marine officers he was meeting with. At 11:45, it was time to move to the officers' club for the formal reception. This was the part of the day that Maria had been dreading. As they walked across the base, she found herself walking slower than usual, as if delaying the inevitable could somehow change what was about to happen. The officers' club had been decorated for the occasion. American flags hung from the walls, and a small stage had been set up where Patel would make brief remarks. About 50 people were in attendance: Marine officers, senior enlisted personnel, and a few civilian employees from the base. Maria took her position in the receiving line, third from the left. To her right stood Gunnery Sergeant Peterson, a veteran of 3 deployments who had always been kind to the younger Marines. To her left was Staff Sergeant Chen, a woman Maria greatly respected for her leadership and integrity. As the receiving line formed, Maria noticed that Colonel Williams was standing at the end, where he would be the last person to greet Patel. Their eyes met briefly across the room, and Maria saw something in his expression that looked like understanding, maybe even approval. The reception began with Patel making brief remarks about the importance of the military and law enforcement working together. He talked about his vision for the FBI and his commitment to serving the American people. To someone who didn't know his background, his words might have sounded reasonable and even inspiring, but Maria knew better. She had read his own writings and listened to his own speeches. She knew that his definition of serving the American people seemed to include using law enforcement to target his political enemies. She knew that his idea of working together meant demanding absolute loyalty rather than professional integrity. After his remarks, Patel began moving down the receiving line. Maria watched as he shook hands with the first Marine, exchanging a few words and moving on. Then the second Marine. Each interaction lasted only a few seconds, but Maria felt like time was slowing down as he got closer to her position. Her mouth felt dry, and she could feel her palms getting sweaty inside her white dress gloves. She thought about Sergeant Thompson and the promise she had made to his memory to always stand up for what was right. She thought about her parents and the sacrifices they had made to come to a country where principles were supposed to matter more than politics. When Patel reached Gunnery Sergeant Peterson, Maria heard him say something about being honored to meet such dedicated service members. Peterson responded with the kind of polite professional courtesy that Marines are trained to show to all government officials, regardless of their personal feelings. Then Patel was standing in front of Maria. Up close, she could see that he was younger than she had expected, probably in his early 40s. He had a politician's smile and the kind of confident bearing that comes from being in positions of power. He extended his right hand toward her, expecting the same courteous handshake he had received from everyone else in the line. For a moment that seemed to last forever, Maria stared at his outstretched hand. She could hear the quiet conversations happening around the room, the clink of glasses, the soft background music. She was aware that people were watching, waiting for her to complete this simple, routine gesture. But Maria couldn't do it. Everything she had learned about honor and integrity, everything she had promised to defend when she took her oath as a Marine, everything her parents had taught her about standing up for what's right, it all came together in this one moment. Instead of taking Patel's hand, Maria kept her arms at her sides and looked directly into his eyes. She could see the surprise and confusion on his face as he realized that she wasn't going to shake his hand. "I cannot, in good conscience, shake your hand, sir," Maria said. Her voice was quiet but clear, and in the suddenly silent room everyone could hear every word she spoke. The reaction was immediate. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Glasses stopped clinking. Even the background music seemed to fade away. Maria was aware that every person in the room was now looking at her, but she kept her eyes focused on Patel. "Your public statements attacking honorable service members and your promises to use federal law enforcement against American citizens violate everything I swore to defend when I became a Marine," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. Patel's face went from surprise to anger in just a few seconds. His cheeks flushed red and Maria could see the muscles in his jaw tightening. This was clearly not something he had expected to happen, especially not in front of other people and potentially in front of media cameras. "Do you know who you're talking to, Marine?" Patel said, his voice sharp with anger and embarrassment. "I'm going to be the director of the FBI. I have the authority to—" But Maria interrupted him, something that would normally be unthinkable for a junior Marine speaking to such a high-ranking government official. "Yes, sir. I know exactly who you are. I've read your writings and listened to your speeches. And I know who I am. I am a United States Marine, and I serve the Constitution of the United States, not individuals who seek to undermine it." The silence in the room was complete now. Maria could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. She was dimly aware that Staff Sergeant Chen had taken a small step closer to her, as if offering silent support. She could see Colonel Williams at the end of the receiving line, his face a mask of professional composure, though she thought she detected something that might have been pride in his eyes. Patel opened his mouth as if to say something else, but before he could speak, Colonel Williams stepped forward. His movement was smooth and professional, but Maria could tell that he was positioning himself to take control of the situation before it could escalate further. "Mr. Patel," Colonel Williams said in his calm, authoritative voice, "perhaps we should continue with the reception. I believe there are several other people here who are eager to meet you." For a moment, it looked like Patel might refuse to move on, might continue the confrontation with Maria, but he seemed to realize that making a bigger scene would only make things worse for him. With obvious effort, he composed himself and moved onto the next person in the receiving line, though Maria could see that his hands were shaking slightly. As the reception continued around her, Maria remained at attention in her position. She knew that her life had just changed forever. She had made a choice that could not be undone, a choice that would have consequences she couldn't yet imagine. But as she stood there, feeling the weight of what she had just done, Maria also felt something else. A sense of peace that came from knowing she had acted in accordance with her deepest beliefs, She had kept faith with Sergeant Thompson's memory, with her parents' teachings, and with the oath she had taken as a Marine. Whatever happened next, she would face it knowing that, when the moment of truth came, she had chosen to stand up for what she believed was right even when it cost her everything. The rest of the reception felt like a dream to Maria. She remained standing at attention in the receiving line, while conversations slowly resumed around her. People kept glancing in her direction, some with admiration, others with concern, and a few with what looked like disapproval. Staff Sergeant Chen leaned slightly toward her and whispered, "You okay, Rodriguez?" Maria nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. Her heart was still pounding and she could feel adrenaline coursing through her system like she was back in combat. Patel finished the receiving line and moved on to mingle with other guests at the reception. Maria noticed that he kept his interactions brief and seemed eager to leave as soon as possible. Several times she caught him looking in her direction with an expression she couldn't quite read, anger mixed with something that might have been calculation. After about 30 minutes, Patel and his security team left the officers' club. Maria watched through the window as his motorcade pulled away from the base. Only then did she allow herself to exhale fully for the first time since the confrontation. Colonel Williams approached her as the reception was winding down. "Rodriguez, I need to see you in my office in 1 hour," he said quietly. His tone was neutral, but Maria could see concern in his eyes. She knew that the consequences of her actions were about to begin. Maria spent that hour walking around the base trying to clear her head and prepare for whatever was coming next. She walked past the training grounds where she had spent so many hours learning to be a Marine. She stopped by the memorial wall that honored Marines who had died in service to their country, including a small plaque that had been added recently for Sergeant Thompson. When she arrived at Colonel Williams's office, she was surprised to find that he wasn't alone. 2 other officers were there. A major from the base legal office and a lieutenant colonel she didn't recognize who introduced himself as being from Marine Corps headquarters in Washington. "Sit down, Rodriguez," Colonel Williams said. His voice was more formal than usual, and Maria knew that this was no longer just a conversation between her and her commanding officer. This was official business. The major from the legal office spoke first. "Lance Corporal Rodriguez, we need to discuss what happened today at the reception. Your conduct toward a high-ranking government official could be considered a violation of several articles of the Uniform Code of Military Justice." Maria had expected this. She knew that refusing to show proper courtesy to a government official could be considered conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline, or even insubordination. She also knew that the penalties for such violations could be severe. "I understand, sir," Maria replied. "I knew there would be consequences for my actions, but I felt I had no choice." The lieutenant colonel from headquarters leaned forward. "No choice? You had a very simple choice, Marine. You could have shaken the man's hand like every other professional service member in that room. Instead, you chose to make a political statement." "With respect, sir, this wasn't about politics," Maria said. "This was about my oath to defend the Constitution, based on Mr. Patel's own statements and writings. I believe his goals as FBI director would undermine the constitutional principles I swore to protect." The room was quiet for a moment. Maria could see that the officers were considering her words carefully. Finally, Colonel Williams spoke. "Rodriguez, I understand your position, and I respect the convictions that led to your actions. But you also need to understand that what you did today will have serious consequences, not just for you, but potentially for the entire Marine Corps." Over the next few hours, Maria learned just how serious those consequences would be. Within 2 hours of Patel's departure from the base, reporters were calling the public affairs office asking about the Marine who refused to shake the FBI director nominee's hand. Someone at the reception had recorded the confrontation on their phone, and the video was already spreading on social media. By evening, the story was on national news. Maria watched in her barracks room as television anchors discussed her actions. Some called her a hero who had stood up for American values. Others called her a disgrace to the uniform who had dishonored the military with her political grandstanding. The phone calls started that night. Reporters wanted interviews. Political activists wanted to use her story for their own purposes. Maria's parents called, worried and confused about what they were seeing on the news. She tried to explain to them what had happened and why she had made the choice she did. "Mia, I'm proud of you for standing up for what you believe," her father said over the phone. "But I'm also scared about what this might mean for your future," Maria's mother was crying. "We just want you to be safe," she said. "We don't want you to get in trouble because of politics." "It's not about politics, Mama," Maria tried to explain. "It's about right and wrong. It's about the things you and Papa taught me about always doing what's right, even when it's hard." The next morning, Maria woke up to find protesters outside the base gates. Some were there to support her, holding signs that said things like "honor before politics" and "defend the Constitution." Others were there to condemn her actions, with signs calling her a traitor and demanding that she be court-martialed. Colonel Williams called her into his office again. This time he was alone and his demeanor was less formal than it had been the day before. "Rodriguez, I want you to know that I've been getting calls from Washington all morning. Some very important people are very angry about what happened yesterday. They want you court-martialed and thrown out of the Marines with a dishonorable discharge." Maria felt her stomach drop. A dishonorable discharge would follow her for the rest of her life. It would make it nearly impossible to find good employment or pursue higher education. It would essentially brand her as a criminal in the eyes of many people. "But," Colonel Williams continued, "I've also been getting calls from other important people who think you did the right thing. Some very senior Marine officers have been calling to express their support for you. It seems your actions have divided opinion even at the highest levels of the military." Over the next week, Maria found herself at the center of a national debate about military service, political loyalty, and the meaning of the oath that all service members take. She received hundreds of letters and emails, some supportive and others threatening. One letter that particularly moved her came from Thompson's widow. "I saw you on the news," she wrote, "and I wanted you to know that my husband would have been proud of you. He always said that being a Marine meant standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Thank you for honoring his memory." Maria also received letters from other veterans who had faced similar moral dilemmas during their service. Some had chosen to stay quiet and follow orders, and they wrote to express regret about their decisions. Others had spoken up and faced consequences, and they wrote to offer support and encouragement. The legal proceedings began 2 weeks after the incident. Maria was formally charged with conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. She was assigned a military lawyer, but she also received offers of help from civilian attorneys who wanted to represent her for free. The court-martial proceedings were unlike anything Maria had ever experienced. The courtroom was packed with reporters, veterans, and supporters from both sides. The prosecution argued that Maria had violated her duty as a Marine by disrespecting a government official and injecting politics into a military ceremony. The defense argued that Maria had acted in accordance with her oath to defend the Constitution and that her actions represented the highest ideals of military service. They brought in witnesses who testified about Maria's exemplary service record and her character. One of the most powerful moments came when several Marines from Maria's unit in Afghanistan testified on her behalf. They described how she had risked her life to save wounded comrades and how she had always conducted herself with honor and integrity. Gunnery Sergeant Peterson, who had been standing next to Maria in the receiving line, testified about what he had witnessed. Lance Corporal Rodriguez didn't act out of disrespect for authority, he said. She acted out of respect for the principles that authority is supposed to serve. Colonel Williams was called as a witness for both the prosecution and the defense. His testimony was carefully balanced, acknowledging that Maria had violated protocol, while also speaking to her character and motivations. Lance Corporal Rodriguez faced an impossible choice, he told the court. She could follow the letter of military courtesy, or she could follow what she believed to be the spirit of her oath to defend the Constitution. In that moment, she chose to be the Marine we trained her to be, someone who puts duty, honor, and country above personal convenience. The trial lasted for 3 days. During that time, Maria received support from unexpected sources. Veterans organizations issued statements supporting her right to follow her conscience. Some members of Congress called for the charges against her to be dropped. Even some retired generals spoke out in her defense, but there was also significant opposition. Other veterans groups condemned her actions as insubordination. Some politicians called for her to be made an example of to maintain military discipline. The pressure on the military justice system was intense from both sides. On the final day of the trial, Maria was given the opportunity to speak on her own behalf. She had thought carefully about what she wanted to say, knowing that her words might be the last she would speak as a Marine. "I want to be clear about something," she told the court. "I didn't refuse to shake Mr. Patel's hand because I disagreed with his politics. I refused because his own words and actions suggested that he intended to use his position to undermine the constitutional principles I swore to defend." She paused and looked around the courtroom, seeing the faces of fellow Marines, reporters, and supporters. "When I became a Marine, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That oath didn't come with exceptions for when it might be inconvenient or when it might hurt my career." Maria's voice began to break slightly as she continued. "I thought about Sergeant Thompson, who died defending those principles in Afghanistan. I thought about my parents who came to this country because they believed America was a place where the law applied equally to everyone. I thought about all the Marines who came before me and gave their lives for the freedoms we enjoy. I knew there would be consequences for my actions," she said, her voice growing stronger again. "But I also knew that I would have to live with myself for the rest of my life, and I couldn't live with myself if I had compromised my principles for the sake of following protocol." The court deliberated for 6 hours before reaching their verdict. Maria was found guilty of conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline, but the sentence was lighter than what the prosecution had requested. She received a reprimand and was allowed to resign from the Marines with an honorable discharge. As Maria walked out of the courthouse, she was met by hundreds of supporters who had gathered to show their solidarity. Veterans, active duty service, members in civilian clothes, and ordinary citizens who had been moved by her story were all there to greet her. Among the crowd was Colonel Williams, who approached her as she reached the courthouse steps. "Rodriguez," he said, extending his hand, "it has been an honor to serve with you." Maria shook his hand, feeling the weight of everything that had happened over the past few weeks. "Thank you, sir, for everything." In her final statement to the reporters gathered outside the courthouse, Maria's voice was steady but emotional. "I didn't do this to become famous or to make a political statement. I did it because Sergeant Thompson and every other service member who died defending our Constitution deserved better than someone who would use their position to attack the very freedoms they died protecting." She paused, looking directly into the cameras. "Sometimes the most patriotic thing you can do is refuse to compromise your principles, even when it costs you everything. I may no longer be a Marine, but I will always carry the values the Marines taught me: honor, courage, and commitment to something greater than myself." Years later, Maria would look back on that moment as the most difficult but also the most important decision of her life. She had lost her military career, but she had kept her integrity. She had faced criticism and threats, but she had also inspired others to stand up for their beliefs. The story of the young Marine who refused to shake a powerful official's hand became a symbol of the ongoing struggle between following orders and following conscience. It reminded people that true patriotism sometimes requires the courage to stand alone, even when the cost is everything you hold dear. Maria never regretted her decision. In quiet moments, when she remembered Sergeant Thompson's sacrifice and her parents' courage in coming to America, she knew she had made the only choice she could live with. She had kept faith with the oath she had taken and the principles that had guided her throughout her life. The tears she shed that day outside the courthouse weren't tears of regret. They were tears of relief that she had found the strength to do what was right no matter the cost.